Did you know that there is a truth that no one wants to admit? And the truth is that deep down, human beings don't want God to exist. I will explain why human beings do not want God to exist. Because they don't want to obey. They don't want to have anyone above them, telling them how to live life. In reality, the human being would like to be God, but not to have a God above them. This is the most basic human condition, our fallen condition. And I'll read a text from the scriptures that shows us precisely this. Pay close attention to what God Himself said through prophet Ezekiel, speaking to the prophet there in chapter 8 of the book of Ezekiel, verse 12. God is speaking to Ezekiel and showing the prophet the fallen condition of the people of Israel, the chosen people, the people that God has chosen to serve Him and represent Him on earth. The people had abandoned Him, turned their back on Him. And to show to the prophet the spiritual state of the people, then God leads the prophet to go inside the temple, into the inner chambers of the temple. And He shows him what the elders, in other words, the most mature, the ancient ones, supposedly the wise ones, what they were doing. The text says, God spoke to the prophet, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark? In other words, hidden every man in the room of his idols. For they say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. See the attitude of these elders, again, reinforcing what the text says when calls them elders of the house of Israel. He's talking about the rest of the people, of the population, that they should seek direction, guidance. As usually in society, we see the elders as a reference of what we can learn from them because of their experience, their lifetime. It is longer than ours. What can we learn from them? But it was precisely these ones who the people should have learned from that were doing things in the dark. They were painting images of idols. They were creating their own gods, gods in their own image and likeness, gods for their own taste, because this is what humans do. When they don't want to submit to the only and true God, they create a God for themselves, a God who will accept them as they are, a God to fulfill their desires and whims, is what humans usually do. So these elders would paint within the chambers of the temple images of idols, and they will say among themselves, the Lord doesn't see us. He has abandoned the earth long ago. We are here alone and we do whatever we want. This was the stance of those people, of those who supposedly should be guiding the people. And this repeats itself in the human beings. Certainly you've heard someone saying, God doesn't exist. If He does, He has already abandoned this earth. He turned His back on the earth long ago. And reminds me of that English expression, gaslighting. Gaslighting is when someone tries to make you look like a mad person for something that you are sure about, but they tell you that you are mad, that that's not true. For example, you saw the person grabbing something from your house and you tell them, listen, can you give me back? And they tell you back, no, I haven't done that. You're seeing things. No, I'm certain I saw you doing it. No, I didn't. In other words, you are certain you saw them, you are certain of the truth, but the other person wants to make you think you are mad. Is what human beings do to God. The human beings make a mess out of the world. They do everything God tells them not to do. They cause all types of suffering in this world. And later, they go to God and say, did you see what you've done? Look at the result of the earth you created. Look at the suffering. It's your fault. They put the blame on God of what they've done themselves. In reality, humans don't want God to exist. They don't want to submit and obey His rules and laws. Think with me about the consequences of admitting that God exists. Let's just think about it. Someone who calls themselves an atheist, and they have to admit that God exists. How would that change their life, their lifestyle? Because if they admit that God exists, soon there's a creator. There's someone who is superior to us. And we will have to settle accounts one day. If God exists, then He's higher than us. He is God. So He's higher than us. We will have to settle accounts with Him one day. And if we have to be accountable for everything we did, so it's best to start living according to His laws. Because if we don't live according to His laws, then when we are judged, when we go through this judgment, we will be found guilty and we will be on the wrong side of this final judgment. Do you agree with me? These are consequences that we need to admit if we admit that He exists. If He's creator, He's superior to us. If He's superior to us, He has laws that He would demand and He would judge us by them, but also He gives us the solution. As His word shows us, He's not here to cast us into hell. The word of God leaves it clear that hell was not created for man, but for the devil. He sent His Son to set humans free from hell, is what the Word of God says. So if I admit that all this is true, I need to make a decision. Either I will fit into His laws, under what He has determined, so I'm not a God. I cannot go out there and create gods to myself because there's only one true God. I need to fill me in of His laws because one day I'll be before Him and I'll be accountable for what I've done. These are the consequences of admitting that there is a God, and this impacts me directly. I'll have to change my lifestyle. I'll have to change many things in my life. Or I can choose to ignore all this, even though I know that He exists, and I choose to live as I wish and put my life at risk. So people don't want to admit God's existence. Why? Because they don't want to change their lifestyle. So it is easier to find arguments that cannot be backed by any proof, no proof at all, but it is easier for them to give excuses to themselves and say, God doesn't exist. If He does, He has abandoned the earth, and we are alone, and we make our own rules and laws. And that's why the world is the way it is. In conclusion, let's stop blaming God for the confusion that we create ourselves. Let's stop blaming God for the mess that we made and the problems that we created. This is more fair, honest. And if you want to admit that He exists, so start living according to His word. Otherwise, your faith is foolish. Otherwise, you are assuming the consequences that even though you admit He exists, you ignore all that He says. Learn that these will also bring consequences to you.